My name is James Burton. I'm the Vice Honorary Consul for Germany here in Utah, and I'm thrilled to be here at BYU to introduce my good friend, Dr. Bernd Fischer. Before I do, I think him, Dr. Fischer is a longtime friend of the church and certainly of this institution, BYU. I think to give him a flavor of our audience, how many of you speak a foreign language? How many of you that speak a foreign language speak German? Terrific. How many of you speak more than one foreign language? Two foreign languages? Any speak three? Only at BYU and in this church do we have such a wide variety of language capability and obviously here at BYU, excellent academic students. So we're thrilled to be here. I know I say that on behalf of Dr. Fischer. Dr. Fischer is the Consul General of Germany. He's currently stationed at the consulate in Los Angeles. He has a distinguished career in diplomacy on behalf of Germany. He's been the German ambassador to Croatia, the deputy ambassador for Germany and Japan, in addition to several other diplomatic posts. Dr. Fischer has a PhD from the University of Heidelberg, and he was a Fulbright fellow or scholar at the University of Arizona. He and his wife, Utah, not named after our state, but if you say it the correct way, it sounds just like our state, are the proud parents of two boys, and they just recently had their first granddaughter. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Bernd Fischer.
Thank you very much. Well, shall I speak German, huh? It's a great honor and pleasure for me being back here. I've been here several times lecturing. Once in the 90s, I was lecturing 2 years before the euro came into being about the euro. And, well, it's there now. For all of you who have had your mission or have traveled through Europe, isn't that an advantage to have one currency for the whole continent? And it has, of course, many, many more advantages. I would suggest I speak for roughly half an hour, maybe a few minutes more, about Europe. And then I entertain your questions and comments for the rest of the time. I have to be out in 45 minutes, I know. When we Germans, we are watch clock freaks, so I try to be one this time too. Let me start with a very topical thing. We Europeans had the feeling since the big unification, first of Germany and then of the whole European continent a few years later. Most European countries are now members of NATO and the European Union, and very good relations developed between the EU and NATO and Russia, friendly, trustworthy relations, that a wonderful time of harmony would come upon our continent. And this is disturbed now, horribly disturbed, I hope not destroyed, when the events unfolded in Kiev, the Maidan Revolution as they called it, and later the invasion of Crimea. And we're in the middle of the process. Today I can give you only a few hints which directions it could go, but it could go in different directions too. And we all have to work very, very hard, we Europeans, together with you Americans, and together with Russia and others, to come back to that situation which we enjoyed. And it was only a few months ago when nobody would have thought that things like that would happen. The situation as it is at the moment is Crimea de facto is not part of the Ukraine anymore. De jure, meaning by law, it is. The whole world thinks. Just the United Nations has condemned the unilateral acts of making it part of Russia. But de facto, Russia rules, and the people want it. 99% perhaps, or at least 80% of the people living on the Crimea are Russians, and they have wholeheartedly rejoiced being there. We put sanctions up against that because that's what you can do in such a situation. We cannot reoccupy with military force that. And now there's a lot of diplomacy. The last days, President Obama, Chancellor Merkel and other leaders have tried to, in talks with President Putin, to control the situation. The most important control, and that's what is our problem at the moment, is the question is how is President Putin continue with the issue of the Russian minorities in the Ukraine, but also in other parts of Eastern Europe. Russian minorities, the issue of how to deal with minorities is an unfortunate issue in world politics, has been for many, many years, decades, centuries, and often led to horrible wars. The minority question which we have at hand is that in the eastern provinces of the Ukraine there are sizable Russian minorities who had moved in, well, over the centuries basically. And in the southern provinces along the Black Sea as well. We, the West, are trying to convince the Ukrainian government of the day, also with our heavy financial support, to use all the instruments of international law to protect those minorities, because protection of minorities is one of the most sacred parts of a democratic nation and a democratic society. And of course we hope that from within the minorities there are not moves which could give a prejudice or a chance to for further action from the Russian side. At the moment I am a bit optimistic that this will be the case and that maybe there will be constitutional changes in the Ukraine and the Ukrainians themselves will act in a sensible manner to keep up minority rights. For example, language rights. That's maybe the most important at the moment. The Russians in the Ukraine, in the time of communism, all the way to 93, they felt, well, it's living like in Russia. We can speak Russian, and Russia is the big mother, also in the Ukraine, and so that was not an issue. But now it is an issue, especially since there are attempts in the Ukraine to shut out the use of the Russian language in daily life completely. This is a thing which we have to see that this should not come to that part. So to not give a chance to anybody to intervene again. The minority issue of the Russians goes beyond the Ukraine, both in NATO members, Latvia and Estonia. They're sizable, about 30% Russian minorities. And there is one in Moldavia, which is a country kind of forgotten by the whole world, close to the next to the Ukraine, where there's a part of it where there's also a strong Russian minority, which is trying to secede from Moldavia. These are moments of potential conflict, and if a conflict arises on the Russian minorities in the Ukraine, all those sanctions which we so far have imposed on Russia will be multiplied, and very, very complicated relations will come about. A diplomat should be always optimist, and with this notion I hope that we will continue to build on a few things which Russia needs the West, and the West also needs Russia. The fight against terrorism, it's a very important one, especially Islamic fundamentalist terrorism. It hurts Russia more than it hurts the United States, because there are many, many Islamic people living in Russia. The fight against cybercrime, you can only control cybercrime jointly, is another issue. The joint development on the positive side, for example, space programs. You know that the space mission is the station, and the International Space Station is a thing where Russian and cosmonauts and American astronauts and many others work together as friends. And they want to come up and down also in a joint manner. Many, many, many other scientific programs are there, and of course the economy. The Russian economy has become very much intertwined with the Western European one, also a lot with the American one. And it's not only, some people say, the Europeans have to do what the Russians want because otherwise they cut off the gas. No, it's basically the other way around. If they cannot sell the gas anymore, tell me what else they sell. Go through the lists of export products which Russia sells to the world. Russia is not a very strong manufacturing power. They finance their manufacturing goods which they need, mostly through the sales of fossil energy. So all of this so far had made us ideal partners, the West and Russia, and maybe in some way we'll get back to it. But one thing will not be coming back as easily, the trust. One could say, I hope without cynicism, a good fallout of this is that America and Europe are much closer at the moment than for a long time before. We tended to concentrate on the tiny little issues which were between Germany or France and the United States, and these issues kind of go into the background if we think of the real issues. And within the EU, we Europeans look at each other with much more interest than ever before. Wait a minute, it may be not a bad idea to be an EU member nation. And we'll have soon the European elections and we'll see what will be the outcome. It most probably, there will be more participation than if it hadn't been for the Ukrainian crisis. There will be more discussions among politicians of where we accelerate the integration process of the EU. While we are talking, many central bankers in the not yet member banking systems, monetary systems of the European Union, 18 of the 28 are within the Eurozone, 10 are not, are discussing of speeding up the process within their own countries to be able to join the Eurozone quicker, because they've noticed that being outside of the Eurozone makes you more vulnerable, for example, vulnerable for economic suppression or blackmailing. So one could say these are positive fallouts of a very negative situation. All this Ukrainian situation also brings scholars back into thinking of what is this, the European Union, especially here in the United States, maybe a bit more on the East Coast than here in the West. But I'm here in the West, and therefore I would like to help you elucidate a little bit about the newest in the European Union. You should be aware that your wise forefathers basically told us to get our act together. Those who are interested in documents and speeches, try to get hold of the Burns-Stuttgart speech, 1946. Secretary of State Burns was the Secretary of State in the Truman cabinet, who gave a speech in totally bombed out Stuttgart and said, "You Europeans, look what you've done. Try to get your act together. Find a system for the future Europe and we will help you, which will never ever put our boys from Kansas or anywhere into harm's way because you are fighting each other again. And in 2012, the Nobel Peace Committee, the only one which is in Norway, the peace side, gave out the Peace Nobel Prize to the European Union. And I was very moved. A lot of intellectuals in Europeans were moved. And it was for the first time we could say, Secretary of State Burns up in heaven, mission accomplished. But this mission accomplishment is not such an easy thing, because just in a very short time, since 46 and 2012, we built something which is rather stable at the moment. But why did we do that only that late in our history? When looking back for 2,000 years, at least the last 1,000 years, and especially efficiently in the last 100 years, we were killing each other off with the most modern machinery, war machinery you could think of. In 1916, during World War I, and we are all thinking of World War I in this year because the 100th anniversary of World War I, the breakout, happened this year. In June, Sarajevo, the killing of the Austrian-Hungarian crown prince and his wife. In this war, in one battle, it took about 2 weeks. In Verdun, in France, there was a hill which the German High Command wanted to have and the French High Command. And in these 2 weeks, 100,000 young men died in this battle for the one hill in Verdun. Many years later, the German Chancellor, who I worked for, Helmut Kohl, and the French President Mitterrand were together on that hill. And they were standing there, and they were so much touched by that memory of this useless, senseless shedding of lives, that they grabbed each other's hand and were holding it for many minutes. This is one of the books in every Franco-German, pictures in every Franco-German history books. So people can become wise, and we did. Now, however, all these wars often had as a basis economic problems, because in diplomacy it's a very easy way to do it. You blame for failures internally, you blame the country next to you, and then you go into war with them even. That was the often used mechanisms. And therefore, from the very outset, we made the European Union an economic and social proposal, so that we would be able to, the people would be unable, the nationalists, to blame the others. And therefore we founded the European, starting with coal and steel, then with nuclear issues, and then with all the economics, especially trade issues, and then we went on in basically every issue of life. We did create a European Union in which every citizen would understand it's much more advantageous to do things together than apart. These are issues which you Americans will say, I don't understand it. We do everything together between Utah and Colorado or Nevada or whatever, but not in Europe. You missionaries who have been there, if you drive with a car 2 hours, it's almost automatical that you're in a foreign country. And the fact that a European can travel freely in most countries without passports, with the same currency, or can take a job in another European country freely, or transfer his capital, or sell his goods, all these what we call the freedoms of the EU, this had to be fought for, because before there were the borders and the soldiers were standing looking at each other with the rifles ready to shoot at each other. And the result has been almost uninterrupted boom in Europe. Europe has been growing. And then we even went into this complicated area of creating a joint currency, at least 18 of us. Now this is a little experiment, because while you as Americans have the dollar in Nevada and here and in Colorado, but you have one central federal government. But we have 18 member states. We have 18 governments, I mean those who are in the Eurozone, who all have their own agenda for economic and social politics. And so after 10 years, we started in 1999, 2003, 2002, the money was in the streets. All of a sudden, cracks appeared. 2008, 2009, 10, 11. And a lot of people said, that's the end of the Eurozone and maybe the end of the whole European Union. It was the biggest crisis we have had, because the system of having a currency and different economic policies, that didn't work. But the leaders of Europe, all of them jointly, and my Chancellor, Mrs. Merkel, played a certain role too, I must say proudly, they started to fix the European currency, to fix it in a way that not a single European currency member country, especially Greece, which was really endangered at the time, but others in Southern Europe and Ireland, could be helped in a most efficient manner. We set up a fund, a European, we called it the European Stabilization Mechanism, worth 1.3 trillion US dollars. And this was so big that nobody dared to speculate against those member states of the EU anymore, which had before overspent or had done not so good economic and social policies. Secondly, in order to avoid that these member states could do the same thing again, we put them, no journalists around here, we put them on a leash. In the sense that the European Union, most 25 of the 27 set up a pact, we call it a fiscal pact, which all the 25, Britain and Czech Republic not, accepted the control of the European Commission on their spending politics. So in the moment when they spent more than they were allowed based on the normal growth of indebted, that's 5%. And this has led now to a situation that everybody spends its money wisely, and especially not only spending it, taking more care of the income, because the problem in Europe has always been there were certain parts of Europe where paying taxes is not such a great proposition. I mean, it's nowhere a great proposition, but there it was even a worse proposition. So a lot of tax evasion, money was not coming to the government. And secondly, there was a lot of the enterprises, which in America and in Germany and many other countries are privately owned, were still in government hands, and a lot of not so good economic dealings happened. And so they sell off and sold off many of this. So what we have at the moment is stability. And just 2 weeks ago, and that's why I find my mission here so fascinating, because nothing was anywhere in the papers, anywhere in the Southwest or in any national news. So I can give news out here. 2 weeks ago, we finalized the European Banking Union. That is one of the three pillars of saving the euro. The banking union means, and it were very complicated negotiations. All this, by the way, you can read again in the fantastic websites of the European Union. And even Wikipedia is good in this. No, really, I always check and double check. You can read all about the structures of the Eurozone and about the EU in this. And the banking union means now that the creators of many problems, the banks in the countries where there's a problem, can be taken out of business jointly, basically overnight. And all the other banks have to pay for the damage done. So it's not the taxpayer anymore. And this will create a strong and stable Eurozone for many years to come. And those of you who have to exchange your dollar against the currencies of the European Union will see you don't get that much for your dollar. We are very solid in the euro's value now. This all is based on solid structures, and again, I plead you to read that in the website of the European Union. A legislature, a European Parliament, which is soon having its elections, and a European Council, meaning the member states where they have certain voting rights. A executive, meaning the European Commission with 28 commissioners, led by Mr. Barroso, which does really good things in spending the money which the European Parliament just recently have given them for the next 7 years, including this one, 1.3 trillion US dollars, and most of the money being spent of bettering the life in those parts of the EU where there's still problems, for example, Romania, Bulgaria, mostly in the east, but also in Greece and other places, but also in smaller areas of Germany and other more richer parts of Europe. And the agricultural money for all the European farmers have a chance of being subsidized. And for many other areas, for example, the policies of environment. We Europeans are very environment conscious, and we have put up big programs to clean up the air, the water, and taking away dangers for the environment in very many areas. This environmental program makes me also very proud. So, and we have a European Court of Justice. Let's not forget that. Because for the Eastern Europeans, that was the most important when they came in. For the first time in 3 generations, people could take their own government to court, could blame a local judge for corruption, saying his verdict was so wrong. He got, and I know he got bribery money from this or that. This would not have been thinkable in communism. And now people are really free. And this freedom and this strength of the new Europe creates peace, but it also creates an attraction, a pull factor for Ukrainians, and believe me, also for many Russians, and for many people all over the world. People come from Africa, endangering their life with boats, going with boats to Italy and other places, because Europe is now basically, as the United States, one of the attractive places to live with a free, peaceful, based on the rule of law lifestyle. And we Americans, Germans, we say, what's new about that? The young ones. We can always say, you cannot say what's new about it. You had it for 200 years and so on. But we can say, it's rather new for us. And it's the most precious thing is really that we have now a free democratic Europe. And we want to keep that. Let me say a few things about Germany, because I have to do a little propaganda, because what is Germany, has Germany done in the recent years we can be proud of, and maybe some of them are even interesting for America. One thing which President Obama also has claimed in his recent speeches is our dual education system. This dual education system, which we have had in Germany since 1880, so long time ago, means that every kid who leaves high school, or middle school we call it in Germany, that is at the age of 16. We have still a little bit differentiated school system. Goes to a factory or into a hospital or wherever, even in the service industries, hotels or so, and gets a 2 to 3 year training on the job by trained trainers, which we call Meisters. And after those 3 years, they get a tough they go through a tough examination, den Gesellenbrief. And the German speakers, Gesellenbrief. And during all those 3 years, they go 2 days a week into a school, which we call Berufsschule, which is something like a junior college. And then when they have this exam, they proudly, for the rest of their life, say, I'm a welder, I'm a nurse, I'm a hospital worker, I'm a worker in a hotel or anything, and I know my job. This is the single most important factor for the fact that we are after China, but we are 80 million, they are 1.3 million, the number 2 export nation in the world. It's not our managers, it's not our engineers, and sorry, James, not our lawyers. It is our workers who are the best trained workers. Many other countries in Europe emulate a little bit this system, but is something which we are proud of. And we have now a system here in place where we, especially on the East Coast, German companies and other companies together with the German Chamber of Commerce system, which also plays a role there, and American community colleges are using this. You may know that, now I have to do product placements. You always have to do that later in life. The Mercedeses, many of them are made in the US, in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And the workers who work there, they go together with a local educational system exactly through this apprenticeship system. Any worker in Tuscaloosa has a kind of a Gesellenbrief. That's what creates quality. Or the same Spartanburg in South Carolina, the BMWs. So there are many, many, many reasons for this system. And in many parts of the US, they are now look a little bit more. I discussed that with Governor Herbert recently. And he also likes the idea. But admittedly, this is not flattery. It comes from the depth of my heart, knowing Utah a little bit. I think there is not a state in the US where workers are so well trained as in Utah. Now, the other thing which we are very proud of, and again, Utah may not be a state which we have to argue about, is our attempts on in the environmental side. Germans have become really crazy for renewable energies. When you fly over Europe and don't touch down in Germany, you can even tell when you are over Germany, because from the planes you can see all those huge wind machines, these wind wheels. The whole nation is plastered with them. It creates also problems. First of all, they don't look too good. Secondly, often the wind is not there where the electric power is needed, so we need to build huge transmission lines, mostly from the north to the south. But we Germans get rid more of our dependence on fossil energy, because we think oil and gas we better use for plastics and medicine, and leave a little bit for the generations to come. So that is something, but maybe the most important, which, by the way, sets us Germans apart from the rest of the EU, of many EU members, is that we decided, after an event which happened on the other side of the world, Fukushima, to shut off until 2022 all our nuclear power stations. We want to get rid of the nuclear power. This, of course, is a proposition which a lot of people in the business community make a little bit jittery, because it means, what does it mean? We need all this energy, and at the same time we say, and we will replace it with renewables, so not with additional fossil energy power plants. At the moment we are still on track. We have shut off more than half of them already for good, and only the most modern ones are running. And sometimes I tease my friends in Southern California. You may know, when you go from Los Angeles to San Diego, you drive by the San Onofre power station. And I always say, my car automatically accelerates when it sees the station. Let's get out as quickly as possible. But they have shut it off in the meantime. So that's a specialty of Germany. So renewable energies and the dual system and a few other things, we try to be helping the world together with a solid economy, by the way, also a solid state expenditure system. For 2 years in a row, 2012, 2013, we ended up, we got more in that we spent, meaning we got more taxes in than we spent for the national budget. We are the only ones in the EU. We're very proud of that. And except our civil servants, because they could have given us a salary additions, but what can you do? So we try to be model without being too much imposing, because of course every country has its own system. But we think what is happening at the moment is strengthening the future of the European Union, and that's the most important. And so is creating a big part in helping to develop a safer world, because we do with what we give, example of giving money to the Ukraine, we try to help, especially our only world power left, the United States, to do their tough business around the world in all the hotbeds. And that's what we Germans are proud of, that we, with a Marshall Plan, you started to help us. We can help you a little bit now. Here's the moment when I open the floor for hopefully comments. I mean, criticize me fully, or questions. Thank you.
We have a microphone over here, so if you come to the microphone, state your name and your question or your comment. Does that work? Is it on?
It should be on. No, it's not.
If not, you can also yell. If you just stand up and yell from the back, if you speak loud enough so that we can hear you.
Hi, my name's Connor Kreutz. I'm studying international relations. My question is, I understand that Germany has nearly 80 billion euros worth of exports to and imports from Russia. How does that complicate diplomatic relations with Russia, especially during this time of crisis?
Thank you very much. This is, of course, a central issue. It does not mean that Germany is in any way compromising, that it tries to mellow down the joint answer of the EU and together with America, of the EU and the United States or the G7 on this. Germany was one of the first who had demanded that Russia's membership at the G8 should be suspended for a while. And since that was a big clearinghouse on economic matters between also Germany and Russia, that was quite a sacrifice. Normally one would say, history proves that, the higher the trade numbers are, the better is a chance for reason to prevail. You mentioned that, the 80 billion. The 80 billion, we may lose some of it, but the other side too. And then again, Russia is by itself. We are the 28, we are the rest of the Europeans, and that, Pete, even includes Norway and its vast resources. We can weather such a storm much more than others. So that's why we are confident that, especially because of economic considerations, reason will prevail in Russia.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Chris Santos. Just kind of following along that line, do you see a possible way to counteract Russian aggression is to kind of lessen dependency on Russia in terms of gas by receiving it from the United States? Do you see that as a possibility?
Yes. Yes, if need be. If needs be, for example, if things get worse and we retaliate, Russia retaliates, then we would have to find new sources for needed energy. Now the Crimean crisis, have you noticed, it happened at the end of the winter heating season. So there's a lot of time for all of us to think things over. I know a bit the gas industry in Germany, and I know I've been once in the headquarters of the grid headquarters, a huge wall with all the pipelines where all the gas was running, at what capacity or so all over Europe. It's easier than one thinks to go from one to the other. And Russia will notice that it's a two-edged sword, I think you say, because if they shut it off, of course, the flow of money is shut off into Russia. And there are a lot of people, not the poor ones, but others who got used to the influx of the money. I mean, to buy a little watch for $500,000 in Monaco, and so you need the funds for that, you know. So Russia is a country which luckily has become a little bit accustomed to luxury too. And therefore I think it won't be so bad, I hope. But sometimes, and hopefully not in this case, economic reasoning is overshadowed by political, well, I wouldn't say madness, but political considerations. Thanks for your question.
No more questions? Yes, Paul.
So again, thank you, Dr. Fischer, Paul Carey from the History Department. Just a question about the picture that we've received of this stable democracy that Germany is, strong export power, good neighbor, good friend to the United States. FC Bayern has now beaten Manchester. So,
Did you prepare this?
But my question really is, one of the things I recall Pope Benedict, the German Pope, saying is that children are always a sign of hope in the future. And when I think of Germany and all that is going well, why do we seem to have this disjuncture with children and the future? If there's a belief in the future of a strong Germany and a strong EU and a very stable democracy, flourishing economy, what do you see is happening here with the low, some call it a demographic winter, that's occurring now with the children in Germany?
Yeah. It's hard to answer that. my children are in the age group where it is possible to regularly get children. One succeeded, the other one hopefully soon. And I talk also to many of their friends. That generation, especially after going through academic training and also the women and spending a lot of money and time into their education, they are fixated on career. That's often a reason. And career means for them they are being told, yeah, you can have children a few years later, and some of them they lose the contact to the moment, and then it's too late. That happens also often enough. And then my generation, people who at my age have no children, you can see how in almost every case how sad most of them are, and say that was the major mistake in life, not having children then. It is all the statistics in Germany point at there is a big positive feeling towards the future, but it does not automatically translate in having children in Germany. My heart warms up when I walk through Utah, to be quite frank. And you could say there are more children coming at the moment in general, but it's France is much better, by the way. France, there are, and Germany is not the worst of, much worse of other Eastern European countries, where they say we need first all the amenities which the Westerners always had. It's so hard to say. And there's another thing which makes me a bit. Now you got me all fired up. There are so many cities in Germany which lose contact with faith. Only a third of the children being born in Hamburg are baptized. It's tough. For almost no obvious reason. Just that there's a loss of interest. Therefore, I personally am very grateful for the missionaries who go through Germany and show that there's a different life proposition for our life and on earth and after earth. It's a complicated issue, the materialism. One statistics is quite clear. After a major disaster like World War II, people forget about materialism, and then they become interested in family. We have a baby boomer generation in the 50s or 60s or so, where they say, now there's a chance again. But now is a situation when the German population is concentrating on very materialistic things. We have so many vacations. You know, we have many more vacation days than you have. Germans are constantly traveling around the world. I was recently last week in Bryce Canyon and in Zion Canyon. Every second person who walked by was a German. It's unbelievable how the Germans love to spend their money and time on anything but that. What I say when I walk with my boys, one was at BYU, by the way, for a while, walk with them through the streets of Berlin, and a Ferrari drives by, and I say, look at this one, if I hadn't you, I had that one. But then I tell you, we made the right decision. My dear young friends, let me say one thing. I am very proud at what you are doing around the world and what you are doing at BYU. My son had told me to also convey this to you, how proud and happy he was among you. You take life seriously, and I'm still touched by the speeches from yesterday. One of the speakers yesterday spoke about the Latter-day Saints Church Olympic medal winners. And he said, you have 4.5 minutes. You know, that lady who went down in 4.5 minutes. I don't see many young people as a group which are so aware of what to do with these 4.5 minutes. And I congratulate you for have chosen, and all your leaders, being at BYU in the universities and in the church, and of giving them the sickness. It's very great to be among you. Thank you.